Hello, good evening. Thanks everyone for sticking around. My name is Daniel Medin, and I'm really excited to be here with Geetanjali Shree. She's a novelist, has authored 4 works of fiction, written originally in Hindi, and so I'll tell you the names of those books. There's Mai, which was published in 1993, which has appeared pretty recently, maybe a year and a half ago in French, right, 2 years. Our City That Year from 1998, which has just appeared in English. The Roof Beneath Her Feet from 2008. The Empty Space from 2006. And Tomb of Sand, which was published in Hindi in 2018 and published in English in 2022 in a wonderful translation by Daisy Rockwell that was awarded the International Booker Prize. There's also an excellent translation into French by Annie Monteau, and you'll have a little taste of that later. And so I just want to welcome Geetanjali and everyone else for coming tonight. So revolution, one definition of it could be, overthrow of an established government or social order. And I think that everybody understands, and people have discussed in previous panels, the larger picture of it, the larger social and collective phenomenon. And we'll discuss that a little bit in this conversation too. But I wanted to begin by discussing a more kind of compartmentalized and reduced version of that, one that begins with an individual, which is to say an individual rebellion or an individual revolt. Because I feel like that moment of saying no to something is a prominent feature in your fiction. Negation is a kind of affirmative act. And Tomb of Sand opens up with this grand matriarchal figure known as Ma. She has other names as well, and we learn her real name maybe at the end of the book. But she's in the house of her son. She's lost her husband, and she literally turns her back to the world, and she faces the wall. And the very first people that she says no to are, in fact, her own family. And I wanted to maybe begin by asking you about Ma, about this particular character and her reason in this novel, the variations of refusal and negation, beginning with her family, but later as the novel proceeds, it will expand to encompass state, bureaucratic papers, and so on.
Okay, well, first of all, hello everyone. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
And thank you, everybody who's made it possible for me to be here in this utterly stunning venue. So I'm here in conversation with him, and I'm looking forward to it, and I hope the conversation will extend to us as well, and some interesting things will come out of that. So you have picked out this motif, no, from my work as an important one, which recurs and has many echoes. So I feel like saying something which is both frivolous and serious. I come from the country of Gandhi, who's all about non-cooperation. So his way of protest is no. I do not accept that, no. So I think somewhere this figure does, I think, become as iconic. Her no becomes almost as iconic as Gandhi's no, when she non-cooperates about lots of laws and various other things later in the book. But where we begin, it is just a much more ordinary, daily no, coming from an old woman who, as you said, she's touching on 80. She's lost her husband recently, and it looks like she has no more any interest left in life. And for me, it's the way I work. It's my creative process, so allow me to just say a few words about that. For me, all these stories are somewhere in the air or in me, but I don't have a set agenda or a very clear idea when I set out to write about what the plan is and which way it will go. So I'm actually waiting for a motive to take off. And that motive became this elderly woman, a very ordinary sight in most families anywhere, or most human homes anywhere, of an older person who looks like they have no interest left in life, and people are trying to get them up, to get them re-interested in things, and they are pushing themselves into the wall as if to bury themselves alive because it's all over. So this image stayed with me and became the image which got me going on this novel. It became the story of a lot of my work is actually located in the home, in North Indian joint family homes. That's also because I don't think homes are really sealed, hermetic spaces which have nothing to do with what's happening outside. I think homes are very much the microcosm of what's happening in the larger world. So even just following lives within the home brings the entire world into the stories, as we always see. So she's in a North Indian joint family home and not interested in life, and turns her back to the family, and all these, her sons and her grandchildren, they're all trying to get her up and saying, get up, and she's saying, no, 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 I don't want to get up, no, I don't want to get up, it's cold, and she kind of just curls up inside the duvet and doesn't want to get up, and it starts there. And that image stayed with me, and at some point, something stirred, and it became, a kind of doubt arose about the way she was saying no, about the way she was pushing herself into the wall. Was she saying no to life, or was she saying no to the immediate family behind her? And was she pushing herself into the wall to bury herself alive because her life is over? Or was she pushing herself into the wall to bore a hole through and come out on the other side and reinvent herself? So this happened.
As a reader, you're not even sure the extent to which it may be genuine grief. This is really just in the opening pages of the novel. Yeah. And you don't know her yet, right?
Yeah, so. And I mean, why shouldn't it be genuine grief also, which is giving way or leading on to this? So here's a woman who, from saying no, suddenly seems to be saying something else, which leads her into another life, and through that wall, into another birth, so to speak. And that became the sort of start of the novel.
It's quite fascinating because, the world of international literature is one in which you have these really strange gaps between the period in which a novel is published and the moment at which it might appear in another language. And so we're talking about Tomb of Sand. I've just finished this earlier novel called Our City That Year, which was just published in English. And it's interesting because the conclusion of that novel, you have an older man who turns his back to the world and in fact even looks at a wall. And so of course I'm aware of this parallel from one to the other because they're both very powerful images of someone voluntarily, somebody, well, in the case of the other character, Dadu, has been a vital character, has been a lively character throughout the entire work, and all of a sudden it's almost it's a tragic refusal. Whereas in this novel, it's the very beginning, and she's going to turn around at some point. But those echoes are extraordinary because it's visual, but it's clearly something that was. You're saying that this novel, Tomb of Sand, started from that image of Ma. Yeah. Well, maybe rather than framing it any longer, we'll do a little reading from the very opening, a few pages into the book. And I've asked Geetanjali to read a bit So you can hear the no in Hindi, the many no's in Hindi. And afterwards, I will read from the translation by Daisy Rockwell, and those of you listening in French will hear the translation in French by Annie Mantel.
Okay. So here's a flavor of the language. I write in Hindi, my mother tongue. नहीं, मैं नहीं उठूंगी. गठरी लिहाफ में ढुकी बुदबुदा देती. नहीं, अब तो मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब नहीं उठूंगी. नहीं, नहीं. चंद शब्द जिनमें बच्चे घबरा रहे थे, माँ मर रही थी. शब्द होते क्या हैं जी? ध्वनि जिसमें वे अपने मतलब झुला देते हैं, जिनका कोई प्रमाण नहीं होता. अपनी राह निकल लेते हैं. मरते तन और मन के अवसाद से उपजे अपने मतलब का उलट मतलब पकड़ लेते हैं. बोया बीज खजूर का, खिला वहाँ गुड़हल. अपने ही संग दंगल, अपने ही खेल में रत. अभी नहीं उठूंगी कि डर और मर से कौन खेल रहा था. यांत्रिक ये शब्द तांत्रिक हो चले और माँ कह वो रही थी, पर वो था कुछ और या हो गया. नहीं नहीं, मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब तो मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब तो मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब तो मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब मैं नहीं उठूंगी. अब तो मैं नहीं ही उठूंगी. थैंक यू.
No, I won't get up. No getting up. Not now. The bundle wrapped in the quilt mumbled, no, no, not now, not getting up. These words alarmed them, and her children grew more insistent. They were afraid. Oh, our dear mother, Papa's gone and he's taken her with him. Stop sleeping so much. Please get up. She keeps sleeping. She just lies there, eyes closed. Back to them, they whisper. When Papa was alive, she had put her all into looking after him. She was alert, at the ready, no matter how tired, busy getting round to a pulp, very much alive, irritable, upset, coping, faltering, breathing breath after breath after breath. Everyone's breath flowed through her, and she breathed everyone's breath. And now she's saying she won't get up, as though Papa was her only reason for living. Now he's gone. Has her reason too? No, Ma, no, the children insisted. Look outside. The sun is shining. Get up. Pick up the cane. It's hanging right here. Try some roasted rice. It has peas in it. Maybe she has loose motions. Give her digestive powder. No, I will not. No, 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 Ma mules. She's tired, poor thing, alone and defeated. Lift her up. Get her involved. Entertain her. Sympathy flows from them, immeasurable as the waters of the Ganga, washing over Ma's back. Not now, Ma tries to scream, but her voice comes out a whimper. Did Ma think that her children's efforts to make her live were pushing her into the wall? Was that it? When footsteps neared the room, she'd turn her back. She'd stick to the wall. She'd play dead, eyes and nose closed, ears shut, mouth sewn, mind numb, desires extinct. Her bird had flown. But the children were also stubborn. They dug in. How to make eyes, nose, ears grow on that back? It was all the same old to her. Same squabbling and squalling, same fire, fuel, and flour, same wash the diapers. No, no, she repeated. Here was no machination, her words machine-like, a machine winding down, a worn-out mechanism. In the languor of conserving energy, she mumbled weakly, no, 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 not getting up anymore. Just a few words, but they alarmed the children. Ma is dying. Words. But what are words, really, They're mere sounds with meanings dangling from them. They have no logic. They find their own way. Arising from the squabble between a sinking body and a drowning mind, they grab hold of antonyms. The seed planted was a date tree. What blossomed was hibiscus. They wrestle with themselves, wrapped up in their own game. No, now I won't get up. Who was playing with the fear and death of that phrase? These mechanical words became magical, and Ma kept repeating them, but they were becoming something else, or already had an expression of true desire, or the result of aimless play? No, no, I won't get up. No, I won't rise now. No rising now, new, rise, new, now rise, new, now I'll rise anew. And I don't read Hindi, but I can tell that something's going on, and this was a heavy lift for the translator. You speak of play, and maybe this is a good opportunity to tell us about what we're missing in the language itself. Certain things were audible when you read in the Hindi. I hope they were audible in the English, but even this refusal is something that you're playing with as though it were a kind of clay, it seems.
I mean, it became a play with the sound of the word. And I mean, again, let me go off a little on a tangent. But there's this great scholar of languages in India, ancient India or medieval India, I've forgotten. I mean, I don't know exactly which era. But his name is Bhartrihari. And he speaks about the ephemerality of language, the mercurial quality of language, and he says that there are no synonyms in language. He says no word means exactly that same thing in another word. And he says every single word has more than one meaning. So where does that leave us, with language? So it's something so changeable and so fascinating, and I think that's in my writer's journey, that is something which is really, like language has become an entity in itself for me. And I really love playing with it, getting into it, letting it do all kinds of things, to the narrative. So in this case, again, it happened fairly organically. But, in Hindi, the word for no is nahi. But in conversation, you say, nahi, nahi, nahi. And the word for new is nai. So actually, if you keep on saying nai, nai, this is nai, and this is nai. So it's the context which really decides it. The sound can become almost the same. So that play just got into the narrative, from nahi to nai to nai. So she's saying no, and then she's saying new. I will only get up new. No, I will not get up. No, I will not get up. New, I will get up. Only new.
That will take 200 pages, but she will get up, and it will be anew.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well, because I think you can hear in this opening a stylistic feature, a way that you narrate that I admire greatly, because it also sort of it's a form of narration that feels novel to me, which it's very oral, it's very vocal, and in the English, it's very difficult to distinguish who is speaking. It's not choral, it's not a form that I'm familiar with. If anything, it feels idiosyncratic sui generis, and it's in the two novels that I have read by you. And what's extraordinary about that is simply, for example, in the instance that I read aloud, you can tell at different moments these are members of the family who are posing questions or speaking amongst themselves, speaking to one another. It moves back and forth between Ma, who's speaking, and these other voices. And you've done this at many different levels. This happens later on in this novel. There's another novel that's set largely in a university at a period of tremendous historical turmoil. And there's a way in which you seem to grab these different voices and do precisely what you suggested earlier, which is to say that if you begin with families and you begin with the way that people interact with one another at this microcosmic level, you're also going to be able to paint a larger portrait. In some ways, you're almost being coy, because you do actually paint the larger portrait as well. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier. It's fascinating that there are silences in the fictions, but there are also very talkative novels. And to the point where, I mean, one of the extraordinary things in reading it is these are novels made out of voices, of people arguing. I mean, there's an element of, you can even say, it doesn't resemble Dostoevsky or Philip Roth, but in the same way that both of them are good at having people yell at each other and badger one another and love one another, but all vocally. You see that at the family level, but you also see that colleagues discussing politics everywhere. So much of it is spoken. And you have a sense, it creates, without traditional realism, a sense of the world as it exists, the sense of society as it exists. And I suppose, because again, I have there's this gap in this, in what I've been able to read. This is something that you've developed book by book, because it is a voice. It is a way of telling a story through, storytelling is a theme of your fiction as well. Can you say something about this particular mode of capturing voice and allowing the voices to make a lot of noise and tell their own story?
I'm going to try, Daniel, but I'm not sure that I have the answer very pat.
Who wants a pat answer?
Yeah, so let me try. Well, one thing is that I come from a country where orality is very much part of the culture, even today. So I think, and the word in Hindi is dhwani, and I think we live a lot with cadence of the language. And that has perhaps, gone into my linguistic upbringing and my imagination in ways that I don't always consciously know. So I think for me, the cadence of language has always been very important, and therefore a lot of the spoken sounds. For the second thing which comes to mind is that I have actually also worked with theater, with a theater group. I mean, in fact, I do work with a theater group. I don't consider myself a theater person because it's not like I write a play and I hand it to them. It's actually a collaborative exercise. But that experience of, again, of speaking out things has surely, honed my skills, writing skills. The third thing which comes to me is actually, I don't think it's a linear development. I mean, like you say that I might have, developed it over the years. I think it's really my way of working. It's become my way of working. It's always perhaps been my way of working, which is what I have been developing, constantly, anew each time. Mm-hmm. But it comes also from a growing realization. I mean, words is what I work in. Words are my strength. But words are also my biggest weakness, because words are something people have reduced to vehicles of messages. And, so there's a kind of expectation that if you're dealing in words and if you're saying something in words, then what exactly are you saying? Tell me. The message, what is the message? Which is something a musician doesn't have to deal with to the same extent. Visual artist doesn't have to deal with. So it's been something which oppresses me, that you reduce words just to a vehicle, a function of them. And I want to bring out all the other artistic potential in expression. So for me, using words and writing is actually not only about words, but about bringing all kinds of artistic elements together, dance and music and architecture and whatever else, etc. So again, I mean, I think words start playing a different kind of sound game out there. And I'm going a little off your question, I think. But yeah, but this is...
The question's as trampolines.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Anyway, I had written down a few things
have
that,
to
you know, if I don't really follow his question, I'll just speak out of this. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, so I think all this together has given me a certain other feel for the sound of the written, of the narrative. So even though it's not supposed to be dialogue in the way of whatever you know, oral literature or and so on, it's still very much something which is about speech, about well, cadence again. Finally, I don't know if this is relevant, but I think living in times of such certitude as we do today, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems in today's world, on every side, every ideology really, is the absolute certainties we have and the absolute sort of arrogance of that. And I think somehow it's very important to puncture that, and it's very important to, you know, counter this with this. And I think I start playing that game where all kinds of voices and different voices, they come in and they kind of doubt the other, or you know, ask for a re-look or a reimagining or a repositioning, and in that, this whole atmosphere is created that you are talking about. So I think it's a kind of rebellion against the certitude of today's times.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good opportunity to start talking about this politics in history through the writings of the books themselves, and writing as it appears in the books too, because I think that these are both historical novels. On the one hand, Tomb of Sand is a powerful novel about the partition. It takes time to get there, but when Ma does turn around anew, she will have a new life, and she begins to do things much to the dismay of her progressive and liberal daughter, that she can't even keep up with her anymore about them. And by the end of the novel, she's going to cross the border into Pakistan to discover or rediscover things from her past that you as a reader for 600 pages don't know anything about, and that her family doesn't know anything about, and it's only gradually revealed to you as she makes that kind of journey. As I've said earlier, Our City That Year, which, as you can tell from the title, has this kind of allegorical cast. It's our city, that year, and there's a way that it can be read as being set in a specific time in India with the destruction of the temple. That's a kind of culmination of this particular year. But this allegorical sort of title fits and belies the date of original publication, because it's a novel about precisely what you described earlier. Everybody has a certain certainty, and it's about a kind of multiplicity, about nuance, all being flattened under political pressure cumulatively over time. And so it's interesting because I think, you know, about the form in literature, the historical novel, novels that deal with historical elements. It's an expression, it's a genre, partition literature, right? So you might say these are both novels that engage with Indian history. And it strikes me that there's a kind of woman's angle in both. And, you know, so Camus, maybe that's in my mind because of the last talk a little bit, had a book called L'Homme Révolté, which is a little bit about, you know, what are the motivations of revolution and revolt and rebellion. And I like to imagine that in these two books, I sense La Femme Révoltée. There's a woman's perspective who is central and is commenting on things. And this might be, so for example, there's a character, a writer, Shruti, who's in Our City That Year. And as this year proceeds, as the riots, as the tension ratchets up and it moves, at the beginning of the novel, it's on the other side of the bridge. It's the other side of town, and it comes closer and closer and closer. and the violence in the language and in the interactions between people comes closer and closer and closer. And identities of individuals end up becoming, even though they're complicated, either Muslim or Hindi, right? Like everything is kind of like this pressure cooker over time. And she's constantly doubting how to write this. She only has this kind of, there's only the sense of obligation to document in some way what's happening, but she doesn't quite know how to give it a shape. And I suppose that's my introduction to this, but not being a specialist in Indian history and in Indian literature, do you feel that there's been a lack of let's say, a female perspective on larger historical issues, in whether it's in partition literature or writing about the last, 50 years of Indian history? And I ask this question again in the most flexible way possible. I don't want to suggest that when you read these books you say it's feminist history. They're just good novels. But they are grappling with history, and they have strong female characters who are trying to think through and express what's happening in the country, and expressing that through these very individual and female perspectives.
I'm certainly no expert on the on history and on the works that have been done on the history of the country. I think many perspectives have been missing in the writing of Indian history till the last several decades, last some decades, So the subaltern angle, the women's perspective, at some point even the nationalist perspective, it was the imperialist perspective. So I think all this, there has been an ongoing, there have been more and more sort of realization of this thing, and there have been new studies that have come up, and a lot of women have very, very powerful works now on partition, academic works on partition and Indian history and many aspects of Indian history. So sure, there are gaps to be filled, and those attempts are going on. There is a Dalit history, which, the history of the, the so-called lower caste, yeah. So all that is surfacing more and more now, and there's more and more work that is going on in these directions. As far as my work is concerned, you see, I think I could say it about literature, but I could also say it about my work. I think literature is rarely dealing with an immediate event. I think literature deals with something which is a larger phenomenon, a phenomenon around the event. Mm-hmm. So that's why when people say that Our City That Year is a book about the demolition of the temple, I always say it's not about the demolition of the temple. It's about this very troubled history of relationship between the Hindus and the Muslims, the two major communities in India, who have lived together for centuries in some kind of hostility and peace, and it just goes on like that. And what is it that drives them apart? What is it that brings them together? It's something which is being, people are trying to understand ad nauseum, and there are people who say they can never come together because they're two very different philosophies and religions and worldviews involved, and they can never come together. But there's something called the religion or the ideology by the book, and there is something which is in manifestation in daily life, where there's so much that goes on, together. And new cultures.
These are communities that have been proximate to one another. Absolutely. They overlap, and they linguistically and culturally.
And the kinds of things that they do together. Just to give some very, immediate, there is a reference of that in the book, but, my father-in-law, who was one of these kind of feudal lords in a small town in northern India. So this is the time of Indian independence and just before. So the big festival of the Muslims, the Muharram, when they would take the tazia, what do you call it? Do you understand the tazia? Yeah. So, yeah. So, okay. So there would be this procession which would take the tazia. They had to take the tazia out, and there was, there's going to be self-immolation as the procession moves forward. When they would reach, my father-in-law, and he's in India, unfortunately, still has the caste system, even though it's in the constitution, we have a very progressive constitution, and it's everyone has equality and so on. But in actual life, again, there are places where it is much worse than in others, and it's been challenged, it's been turned over on its head, and there are places where it continues in some of the old ways. So my father-in-law, he was the top caste, Hindu caste, okay? So the priest. And the tazia, the Muslim procession would bring the tazia. When it would reach the gate of my father-in-law, the house, they would stop, they'd put the tazia down, and this man would come out, and he would take the tazia, and then they would move forward. So this is how, in daily life, all kinds of commingling was going on. So it's a very, very troubling question. What happens? Why is it that suddenly they begin to feel they can't live together, they have to partition, make two countries? Why is it that suddenly there's so much hatred and violence and enmity and suspicion between them? And at other times, they come together and they form another new community. So it's it's this larger phenomenon which has been going on for centuries, in some sense, which people like me are very obsessed with and very worried about sometimes, and see all the hope in sometimes. Okay, look, I mean, there are all these wonderful coming togethers also possible. And then we see some of the things that happen, and then I want to write about it. I cannot not write about it. And so the book comes out. So it's a dealing with history, but in a quite a different scale and time. It's not an immediate thing. And I would say something similar about Tomb of Sand, I mean, I would say, also remember, I'm a slow writer. I take years to, I don't know why I behave like this, as if I've got 400 years to live. So I take about, 8 or 9 years, I'm just sitting with one work.
But they're substantial works. I mean,
well, yeah, but so what happens is that all kinds of things begin to come into it. I mean, just the time span becomes something else. And it's never just an immediate thing. So when, and it never remains just a specific thing. So Tomb of Sand really, I would say it's much more than just the partition of India into India and Pakistan. I think it's about partitions. I think it's about the sort of making of these very rigid and sharply marked borders in all kinds of things. And it is about almost of a, I think a mourning of, about a civilizational sort of collapse, or the threat of a civilizational collapse, in which the unity of things, in which the equality of humans and creatures and humans and nature and all that is slowly collapsing, and man is becoming the supreme power and destroying the planet. And there is a kind of, I mean, we've grown up on that culture. I'm not sort of idealizing that. I'm not saying everything was working just beautifully in that direction, but that's also something we've grown up with, you know, where everything was to be respected, whether it's an ant or whatever else. And that is why, of course, we have this crazy religion where everything becomes, you know, related to one god or another, you know. So just before you are going to kill the mouse, you must know that, you know, the mouse is the what so-and-so god rides on, you know. So he becomes a sacred creature. So, but you know, it did sort of instill in us. Maybe it was a time of idealism. Maybe it was a time of, you know, a new India coming into being. But it instilled in us a sense of mutual respect, a mutuality, which is the value, you know, we have to live with. And not just animate objects, even inanimate. Were, I mean, as they do in the book, you know, they keep, they have a soul. So I think that worked very well, and it's a kind of civilizational collapse when nothing seems to matter, you know, and everything is, you can do anything you want with anything. So I think the book is really about that larger, you know, human tragedy and mourning, which I think is, well, it just sort of draws attention to the need to do something about that.
Yeah. But it does so with energy and with humor and with, you know,
the humor is
real
important.
Deep humanity. Actually, there's a moment at one point in this novel where this was quite interesting, where humanist becomes a kind of pejorative. And I remember from years ago, because at one point I'd written something on Coetzee and was thinking about South African literature and literature of apartheid, and it was the same thing. Humanist became, you know, that was an insult, you know, to be humanist. But there's a humanity that's in the voice of the characters, and that comes through and makes the experience of reading these books one that is not depressing, even as it's looking things, I would say, directly in the eye, and it's unblinking. And earlier I said something about no, that negation can be affirmative, because it's also rejecting certain forms that are reductive. And I'd like to read just a very short passage from Our City That Year. This is as things get quite awful, and it becomes even difficult for close friends to speak without thinking that it's about something else, that it has to do with identity, without everything having become politicized, and as Geetanjali mentioned earlier, simplified, overly simplified. This writer, this woman writer, Shruti, says, "Why should I separate each strand, each color from my full identity? Whatever I am is beautifully robust in my consciousness. Why should I forcibly awaken it, choose some aspect of it, and abandon others? In doing so, my soul contracts. The dignity of myself shrinks. Its diversity, its simple, beautiful form is ruined, making this bit hazy, darkening that bit, pulling this way, suppressing that way. We are distorting, contorting our own forms and degrading them." And I find this sort of protest and the way that it's articulated, that is a form of revolt. That is something that is moving in these books, is that even as this book is heading toward a very unhappy end, that element of resistant humanity is still there, with the notion of respect that you mentioned earlier.
Right, Daniel. I don't think I want to go into the great differences between resistance, revolt, revolution, etc. I mean, I don't think I can do it, but I do think we underrate what goes on behind ordinary, within ordinary lives and homes. You know, we think the action and all the drama and all the change is happening with the...
It's Napoleon into Russia.
Yeah, right. So sort of very, very sort of loud, visible, combative movements. But there are things happening in these very quiet places where you don't even think of looking, and that is where little changes are taking place, and that is where the system is slowly being upturned. And again, if I may give a little personal, share a personal memory with all of you, it's about my mother. So she lost her husband. Why am I saying her husband? What's wrong with me? My father. When she was, I think, in her 80s. So she had lived a good, long life, in all those years. And she died last year at the age of 97. But, so my mother, and if you meet her, she's a completely domestic Indian woman, motherly person, a wonderful cook, and looks like has just that role to play and that life to lead, a simple housewife. And I can never forget one moment, when the news came that my father was no more. He was living at my brother's house. They were both living with my elder brother. So I went there, and my mother was sitting, and there were lots of people around, and there were relatives around. And I went to her, and I hugged her, and she said to me, it's a moment of grief. And she says to me, he's gone. And she says, but I will not wear only white. In that moment, she says, and white is widow's weed in India. In that moment, she says to me.
How embarrassing. Sorry.
And I can never forget that, And I think, and that's an assertion. And it's not like she went dancing after that and, discoing, but she had asserted herself. She said, I'm not over. I'm there, and I'm not going to wear just white. She says it to me at that moment, And she lived her life after that also. In 97, she went away. So I think, there are these quite amazing things happening behind very ordinary, walls. And that is where the real change is taking place, not with the feminist daughters and all who sort of think of gender and, all the wonderful new language and everything, yeah.
No, I just see that I was checking that this book is actually dedicated to your mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We have 10 minutes for questions that don't come from me, and perhaps some of you would like to ask them.
First of all, thank you for sharing with us a moment of your mother tongue. That was a powerful moment.
Thank you.
The words are your tool. Knowing nothing about Hindi, is there one language for women and one language for men in Hindi, as is the case in some other languages? And the second question would be, you mentioned the caste system. Can you immediately detect from which caste a person comes when you're speaking with her or him? And moreover, can you use that when you're playing with personalities speaking in various ways in your novels? Thank you.
Well, about the language, there is no separation for women and men to speak the Hindi language. The Hindi language itself is an impure language. So the higher language was Sanskrit. Okay, so if ever there was a language which men were custodians of, it would be Sanskrit, which would be allowed only to the most scholarly few women who have made it there. Otherwise, it belonged to the men. And the language spoken by the common people and by women was not Sanskrit. Hindi has come much, much later, and Hindi is really a wonderful language. It's completely impure. It has borrowed from every language around it, several Indian languages, Arabic, Persian, even English, and English has borrowed from Hindi as well. So that has also happened. But so Hindi is this lovely eclectic language, and it's the language of the common people. So there's no difference there. The second question about caste. See, the thing is, now here I am ashamed to say that India is a country of deep inequalities, every kind of inequality, which is again something, you know, so many of us are resisting, yeah, fighting, trying to change. The inequalities come in many shapes. So caste is only one of them. So there's literacy, illiteracy, there's class, certainly. So if you had an upper class, lower caste person from the university, it's not necessary that you will ever make out. But if the lower class and lower caste collate, and you know they're doing the work of which traditionally the lower caste was always doing, then of course you know that this would be a lower caste person. But you know, if you go into urban centers and you go into a restaurant and a waiter is serving you, you wouldn't know which caste he's coming from. Yeah.
So thank you a lot for this discussion and the excerpts. I would have a question related to world literature, maybe a too wide question, but let's try. Because you became Geetanjali, you became quite famous, not only because of this prize, of the International Booker Prize, but also because of other translation. But I mean, that was a very important step in the recognition of your literature, and because of the translation, English translation through Daisy Rockwell. So my question will be related to the relationship between Indian literature and the English literature and the imbalance between the two. There is an Indian historian, famous Indian scholar, who said once that we were speaking of the Sanskrit scholar Kalidasa as the Shakespeare of India, but we would never say that Shakespeare was the Kalidasa of England. Mm. So, do you think that one day things will change, and one day maybe we will tell about, we'll say about a European writer that she's the Geetanjali of Europe, or will it never change? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he's talking about translations making me famous because he's translated one of my works. So he's trying to take credit for some of the fame. And before coming to your question and trying to answer that, again, if I may, an anecdote, which I think, I became so famous, so I have to tell you that, and this is only one, okay? I mean, I've had experiences of this kind, left, right, and center, but I'll only give you one. So there I was somewhere, and I was just walking ahead, and some lady, she was sort of running after me, and she finally caught up, and she was sort of panting, and she said, "Ma'am," and I turned, and she said, "Ma'am, I have to tell you this. Yes, you look so much like Geetanjali Shree." So much for my fame, okay? Yeah, and I can't tell you how many stories of that kind. So fame, I think, has come to somebody, but that's not me, I think. Yeah. And, well, and to return to your question, Nicola, of course, how could I say? I mean, there's so much that is wrong with the world. I mean, there's so much which needs to be turned around. So many inventions which come from the Arabs, but you know, we only know it when I think they came from the Greeks, or the Greeks took over and, you know, disseminated them in the world. And if we just changed everything, or we made some other part the center of the world, everything would be so different. So I think this is about hierarchy in the world, power politics, which till that changes, I don't see anybody comparing an Indian author, comparing themselves to an Indian author in that big sort of way. And again, there's a story, I think, about, there's a famous story, I don't remember the writer, I don't remember the name of the story, but where this man, you know, he never became famous in his time, and he said, you know, my work belongs to posterity, and 200 years later, surely, and 200 years later, he came and he quietly sort of crept in some way, and he was still as unknown as before. So who knows? Who knows? But I think a lot has to change. You know, that hierarchy has to change. And at the moment, you know, West, and even within the West, certain languages have a certain sort of place which is not going to topple that easily.
I would like to follow up on the translation question. So you're writing in Hindi and you're speaking in English. Do you control the English translation of your book? And would you say that it's the same book in Hindi or in English, or two different books? Because we saw that the musicality of Hindi was very special. What could you say about the two books?
I'll begin by saying something which sounds arrogant, but please don't take like that. But you know, whatever language Anna Karenina will be translated in, it will still be Anna Karenina. So that's one thing. I don't think that can be taken away. And if it is not Anna Karenina, then it is, I mean, if it is so different that you cannot relate it to Anna Karenina, then it is not that book at all. So I don't think that is going to happen easily. But having said that, I'm remembering something else somebody said, which is absolutely wonderful. He said the really good translation is an exact replica of the original and is different.
But with every word that has been changed.
Yeah. So I think it is different, of course, but it's also the same. You know, it's different and the same. How much do I control? I don't, because I realize that, you know, I can converse in English, but that doesn't mean that I know the English language. I do not know how to use it, you know, in all kinds of sort of very flexible ways that the translator knows. So, I mean, English is the only one where I could have had some control, but I wouldn't try. I did try with the title. The title in Hindi is Ret Samadhi. Ret means sand, and Samadhi is a, I don't know if you know it, but it's a concept, spiritual concept, in you know, coming from the one of the major Indian religions, which is of meditation, in which the person goes into a state of meditation and can go into it now forever. So in technical terms, the person will die, but actually he's not supposed to be dead. He's supposed to transcend to another world. So he goes into samadhi and he transcends. So samadhi is not death. So it's not a tomb. But there was no word in English for samadhi. So I said I wanted the translator and the publisher to retain the word samadhi as it has been retained in the French.
In the French, yeah.
With the subtitle. But the publisher had an argument, very strong argument against this, and she said that, you know, there's so much exoticizing of the East, and I don't want people to walk into a bookshop and look at something called samadhi and think it's about yoga and, you know, gurus and, you know, spiritualism. And I wanted to look like just any other novel. So we retained that title. But by and large, I do not interfere, and I cannot really know better than the translator. With the last point is that in Daisy's case, I think there are two things which worked very well for us. One is that I was dealing with, I mean, my own language is not pure. Even this impure Hindi I use in the most impure way. I mean, even the Hindi people are upset at how impure I make the language. Okay, so it was a very eclectic mix of all the languages that I am exposed to, even French possibly somewhere. So I think that there was such a play of language out there that it freed Daisy, and she could be equally eclectic in return. You know. So I did some, wherever I had thrown in English, she threw in Hindi. You know. So it became a game that which both of us were playing in our own way, and I think she did a very, very fine job with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a marvelous translation.
Yeah.
I love the little editorial intervention here, because what the other solution is that when you open up the book, there are 3 definitions of something.
Yeah,
so,
right.
It might not be on the cover, but it's pretty close to it. So, well, thank you so much for being here. I want to remind everybody that there are books for sale and that Geetanjali will be available to sign them upstairs immediately afterwards. And maybe we can all just show our appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.